After finishing up the same piece colored 9 times practice, I wanted to test what I learned and do another study of my first plan, a fully colored original piece. So I went searching for subjects I could use. I wasn't willing to design an OC just for this test, and a normal human will be too simple, therefore easy to mess up and look ugly. That is why I decided to make it a fan art again. My mind was preoccupied with Genshin. I naturally gravitated towards the character I was building at the time. I wanted to make the pose original, but I chose not to care about the background so I don't go insane. I also kept myself humble and only went for a simple pose. My only restriction was that I can't reference anything one-to-one. Having made my decision, I gathered reference material. I downloaded this reference sheet. I wanted the scene to be a boxing ring as it's the simplest one, so I found some boxing ring pictures too. I also looked up his in-game animations. Then I started sketching. Halfway through, I realized that it would be hard for me to draw his gloves. The pose started looking more stiff over time as I tried to show more of his body to cover up the fact that his gloves were gone. But I didn't want to bother drawing them because they were too complex. I felt that if I spent way too much time for it, I'd give up, so I moved on to the line art. I used the HB pencil, same as the sketch. My understanding of line art is pretty much none. I just clean up the lines and add details I didn't draw in the sketch. The line art can be seen as more of a cleaner sketch. I fixed the pose further after getting some critique on it. There were some problems with the foreshortening on his arm. I started blocking in the colors. No, I'm not the most intellectual person, so I did that manually, which took a lot of time. Way too much time. His design has different shades that all look like each other, so I dropped colors from the reference sheet and kept them all on separate layers just in case I make a mistake. Moving on, I could finally use a trusty airbrush. I turned off the colors and airbrush shadows with a gray color on a multiply layer. I frequently change the gray to a color to check my progress and feel a full sense of accomplishment. At first, I only added the base shadows. After completing the base shadows, I shared it on a Discord server and someone kindly gave me criticism. I was reminded to add actual lights and darker shadows. I was going to add them later, but it was nice being reminded nonetheless, since I forget things very easily. I then decided that I need a background to be able to make the character feel unseen, so I took the time in the middle to do a simplified background. But, for some reason, the time-lapse was turned off. Totally not because I'm dumb. The background is more or less copied from the references. It wasn't my point of practice, so I didn't care about it much. Though, I forgot to make it 16 by 9, and the ropes looked like intestines. Towards the end, I tried to fix the ropes, but I wasn't sure if I should make the light hit them or not. I chose to put them in the shadow to keep the focus on the character, but I don't think it makes the most logical sense. It seems that when adding the base colors, I forgot to do the internal shading on his fur and some parts of his hair. I fixed it before moving on. This is unnoticeable in the finished piece because of the light placement, so it was for nothing. I added rough lights and darker shadows, turned them on and off plenty of times. Then, finally, I realized that I need to clean them up. The lesson I can say I definitely did not learn from the earlier practice is that I should work more cleanly if I'm going for cell shading. I spent a lot of time blocking in shadows, but it was all so messy that I had to spend even more time redoing them. And this is something that occurred with the earlier practices too. I believe it's caused by my lack of confidence in my abilities. But I don't know why I keep forgetting and re-noticing it over and over again. The shadow layers are all on multiply layers. I have 2 warm ones, one cold one with the face area being warm, and a gray one that has slight blues around the face. I also lowered the opacity of the face on all of them. The gray one is at 40% while others are on full. I probably could have chosen a color that will achieve the same effect with one single layer, but it's okay this way too. At least I want to believe so. It just takes a few more minutes, and I am making one single drawing at a time, so I don't need to be the fastest. There's ambient reflection too, but it's very faint. It's a gray color on a 40% opacity overlay layer. I use the same warm color for the darker shadows, and the same for the shading on his hair. I have no idea how to shade hair, so I just smudged the rough shadows until it looked decent enough. Meanwhile, the light layer is just a white color on overlay. I duplicated the lights on his arm because they looked weak compared to the rest due to the fabric being black. But I'm not happy with how they look. There are parts in this drawing where I forget form exists and shade them as if they're as flat as printing paper. The rest is fixing the background and adding minor details like dots around whenever I felt like putting them and the blush on his cheek. I also put the line art on multiply mode and used this warm shadow color to color the line art of the areas the light hits. But I could have taken it so much further to make the line art more in tune with the piece. Lastly, I realized that the lights didn't have nearly enough color and looked like ghost remains. I fixed it with a color mode layer. I made the last video way after this practice, so my conclusion was heavily affected by this one too. Even when I had an original idea for a piece, I still had the same problems I faced with the same piece 9 times practice. It proved me further that I need to study a lot of stuff before I study coloring. I had problems with not knowing where to draw the body parts, not knowing what to draw, not knowing where the light hit, not knowing where the shadow actually would be. Liquefying for hours trying to get it to look okay, but never with which colors to use. Even if the colors I chose looked bad, I could always change it. I know that this is a privilege that comes with digital art, but even traditionally, if I chose a bad color and it looked real bad, I could just start over. Sure, it will take longer and get me very annoyed, but I'm pretty sure after 1 or 2 mistakes I will get the hang of it. All the other problems I had throughout this test of mine will stay no matter what until I practice them further. I never undermined the importance of fundamentals and I always try to practice them one way or another. Well, I also practice the color and rendering part a lot because it's the most exciting part of art. But I think I can pretty confidently say that, at least for me, it should be the last point of attention and one that is more prone to develop naturally without much effort. Now, being able to distract myself with the makeup after accepting the reality of the situation, it has been easier for me to attempt studies where I don't know what the heck I'm supposed to do. Before this, I will try for 5 to 10 minutes, then give up and move on to the makeup, or just do pose maniacs and be done for the day. I have been studying anatomy in perspective for the last month or so. So far, the progress has been really nice. I know that it will take way longer to internalize these practices and make it come to me automatically, but I'm happy. I'm also planning to make a video on that if you would like to stick around. Thank you for listening.